Moving on to our next concept, which is the concept of ions or charged atoms. Now we have seen earlier that an atom is made up of two parts, the nucleus, which has the neutrons and the protons, and the electrons, which is there in the electron clouds. Okay? Now, we saw that alchemy was not possible. Why? Because alchemy needs to change the number of protons in the nucleus, which is not possible. You also know why that is not possible. Why? Because of binding energy. Now, the amount of energy required to change the nucleus of the atom is huge. So that is why the nucleus of an atom is extremely stable. Since it is stable, we cannot make any changes in the number of protons of the atom. So what happens to the electrons? The good news is the number of electrons in the atom can change. You cannot change the number of protons, but on the other hand, you can change the number of electrons. So you can gain electrons and become negative, or you can lose electrons and become positive. Now, when you gain electrons, it's easy to understand why you become negative. But why do you become positive when you lose electrons? Now remember, for a neutral atom, the number of protons is equal to the number of electrons. The number of protons and electrons are same. Now, if you lose electrons, the number of electrons are decreasing, but the number of protons remain the same. So effectively, the net charge on the atom becomes positive, and that is why when you lose electrons, you get a positive charge. So in here, the simple concept that I just told you is being written in here, that when an atom gains an electron, the number of electrons become larger than the number of protons, therefore giving the atom a net charge. Now the atom becomes an ion, and a negatively charged ion is called an anion. Okay? Going for the reverse, when an atom loses electron, the number of protons effectively becomes higher than the number of electrons, thereby giving a net positive charge to the atom now becoming an ion, and we call that positively charged ion as a cation. Okay? Now, we have to keep in mind that the electron exchange only happens from the outermost, or the valence shells, or valence electrons are the only ones that are getting exchanged. We'll be looking at this concept in more detail in electronic configuration, because as we have said before, that the concept of orbits, which is the planetary like the planetary type of showing the structure of an atom, has been found out to be false. So you don't have shells. For beginners purposes, we'll be trying to simplify the atom by seeing it in forms of the electrons staying in orbits like the planets around the sun. But we'll be quickly moving on to the next concept, which is the orbitals, which is a better way of showing electrons. Now, we discussed this, that the electrons stay in electron clouds, right? Now, whatever be the case, whether it's the orbits or the orbitals, however we choose to see it, the electron exchange always happens from the outermost shells or orbitals. Okay? Now, the outermost electrons are called valence electrons. Now, please keep in mind that all these exchange, the addition, the gain or the loss, both happens at the outermost shells only. The innermost shells are preserved. They don't change much. Okay? Let's take an example for calculating the number of electrons. Okay, we know that O816 is the atom of oxygen, right? The number of protons is 8. The number of neutrons is 16 minus 8, which gives you 8. And the number of electrons is equal to the number of protons, because this is a neutral atom, which also comes out to be 8. Now, for O minus, what does O minus means? O minus means that the atom of oxygen has a net negative charge. Now, when will an atom get a net negative charge? When the number of electrons in that atom will increase, right? So, we had 8 electrons in OH16 in oxygen atom, but there was no charge in here. We have a net negative charge in O minus. That means the number of electrons in O minus is now greater than the number of protons. By how much? By 1 unit. So minus in here actually means -1. Okay? So O minus 1 means there is 1 more electrons. The number of electrons outnumber the number of protons by 1 unit. So the number of electrons actually becomes 9. Now if you have O minus 2 or O2 minus, the number of electrons will become 8 plus 2 because it has a net negative charge of 2. That means the number of electrons outnumber the number of protons by 2 units. Okay? Now let's take an example of a cation or a positive charged atom. Okay. Let's take the example of sodium 1123. The number of protons is 11, the number of neutrons is 23 minus 11, which is 12. The number of electron is equal to the number of protons because this is a neutral atom, which becomes 11, no problem there. Now, Na plus, this is a charged ion. This is a positively charged ion, and that is why it's called a cation. The Na plus in here means that the atom has a net positive charge. And how will you have a positive charge on an atom? When the number of electrons are less than the number of protons. Therefore, this means that the number of electrons are 1 unit less than the number of protons. Therefore, this becomes 10. Now you see here that the number of electrons is 10, the number of protons is 11, so therefore it has a net positive charge. So I hope this is clear. The concept of ions will be extremely important in understanding more complicated groups of ions like the sulfate ion or the carbonate ion and things like that. So we'll be delving into those concepts in our subsequent lectures. But please try and understand the concept of ions, in which the negative means you have more electrons and the positive means you have less electrons than the number of protons in here. So let's move on.